Welcome to the Wildman Rocketry Demon build video. In this video we'll be demonstrating the build with a 4-inch model, but the instructions apply to every size demon. First and foremost, just like with every other fiberglass build, we want to ensure the parts are clean and free of remnant manufacturing materials and debris. An easy way to do this is to just simply throw it all in the bath. Once you've drained the bath and the components have dried, we're going to start everyone's favorite process, sanding. Using your preferred sandpaper grit, and I'm using 120 grit in these clips, sand every bonding surface you can think of. This includes couplers, the motor tube, the airframe tube where the fillets will go, and of course, the fins. If you have power tools, this process is a lot less tedious. Just make sure you're wearing a proper mask or respirator when you're sanding fiberglass. Once all the components are sanded to your heart's content, you're going to want to clean them off again to prep for a proper composite bond. For this step, I'm using the purest isopropyl alcohol I can find. Denatured alcohol also works great for this process. Once everything is clean, sanded, and dried, it's on to the build itself. Getting the placement of the rear centering ring inside the tail cone is a bit of a tricky task on the demon, so the easiest way I've found is to stand the tail cone up on its rear on a flat surface and insert the motor tube. From there, slide the smaller centering ring over the motor tube and use a long screwdriver or your preferred tool to seat the centering ring flat in the tail cone as far in as it will go. From there, you'll want to make note of the ring's position on the motor tube. I used a ruler to reach down into the tail cone and measure how far from the top end of the motor tube it is. Once you've got your measurement, remove everything from the tail cone and glue the rear centering ring in place. This way the ring will properly seat in the tail cone and leave the motor tube flush with the end of the tail cone for your retainer of choice. Obviously, we highly recommend an Aeropack aluminum threaded retainer to complete the sleek look of the demon lineup. Once the rear centering ring epoxy is cured, apply epoxy to the inside of the tail cone where the rear centering ring contacts it and glue it in place. Please note that if you're going to anchor your shock cord directly to your motor tube, you should do that step before bonding the motor tube assembly into the tail cone. Just make sure your forward centering ring is notched to clear your shock cord and it doesn't block any fin slots. In my case, I affixed a closed lifting eye bolt to the top centering ring and tied my shock cord anchor there. Do take note that I did not yet epoxy the forward centering ring in place. Once the rear centering ring and motor tube are glued into the rocket, it's time to tack the fins in place. For this, I just use regular CA, but if you prefer to use epoxy, be my guest. Once the fins are tacked into place, we're going to use the open forward end of the tail cone to access for internal fillets. That's why the forward centering ring isn't in there yet. For this process, I used West 610 with a mixing nozzle to deposit the epoxy and a few tongue depressors taped together to smooth them out, as much as I could. The beautiful part about internal fillets is that nobody ever sees them unless you're dumb enough to put them on video for the world to see. Function over form here, folks. Once your internal fillets are complete, glue the forward centering ring in place and follow that process up by gluing the coupler into the tail cone and fin can assembly. I recommend letting this end of the coupler cure, then gluing it into the airframe, but that's your decision to make. Either way, you'll need to glue it into the airframe. From there, the build is the same as any other Wildman fiberglass rocket kit. Mark out and tape your fillets and lay them out with your preferred epoxy. For the external fillets, I use West System with 406 colloidal silica filler. Here's a pro tip for your fillets too. Once your epoxy starts tacking up, you can very gently finesse the edges into your desired shape with a gloved finger covered in isopropyl alcohol. Just be careful and try not to get too much alcohol on your uncured epoxy fillets because it can cause some problems. Once you get good at this though, your fillets will be pretty much ready to paint over with very little sanding needed to smooth them out. Speaking of which, that's all that's left to do. Just sand and paint your demon how you'd like and let it rip. Thank you for tuning into another Wildman Rocketry video. Don't forget to press the subscribe button and order your demon and everything else you need rocketry related from wildmanrocketry.com.